right, Victor, we'll start in 5 seconds. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Orange County School Board's work session, which has been scheduled today for the purpose of discussing the following board policies: policy overview and planning, IJL library materials selection and adoption, KEC challenged materials policy, BA school district operational goals, BDD board superintendent relations, BDF unitary status advisory oversight committee, BDG school attorney legal services, BG board policy school board policy process, BGC review of policies. The public will not have an opportunity to participate in this work session to provide public comment because this is not a regularly scheduled school board meeting and no action will be taken. And there is no pre-agenda period during which the public would normally address the board on germane topics that are not related to the matter at hand. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. As a reminder, face masks are today officially optional. And we have, I believe, all members but one present, but let me go ahead and take a roll call. Not present, all members but two present, and I believe Member Casterdental will not be able to join us due to a family emergency. So let me do a quick roll call. Member Gallo, are you on the line with us?
Hi, Madam Chair. I'm here.
Thank you. Member Lopez?
She just stepped out, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll, oh, there you are. Member Lopez? We're just doing a quick roll call.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon. Member Colbert?
Good afternoon.
Member Gould?
Good afternoon.
Member Felder?
Good afternoon.
And as I said, Dr. Casterdental is not joining us. Vice Chair Byrd?
Good afternoon, Chair.
And of course, I'm present. I want to remind the public that board members will not be engaging in outside electronic or digital communication during the meeting so we can focus on the meeting itself. To my fellow board members, district staff, I will remind everyone who's going to be speaking to speak directly into the microphone. And now we will begin our meeting with a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And I would urge everyone in the chambers or who might be watching us to keep the people of Ukraine in their thoughts and prayers during this extremely, extraordinarily horrible time. And now for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I read off the policies that we're going over today. I do want to acknowledge before we start that it's a very aggressive schedule. We are not expecting to make any final decisions here today. This is just a work session, but it is an opportunity for the board to discuss these issues and get some sense of where the board is and where we need to focus our time. I also want to point out that we do have two board members who have community meetings already scheduled for this evening and will need to be leaving here by 4:30. So I wanted to make sure that we are realistic in our expectations. We will get as far as we can get. And with that, Dr. Jenkins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you've already mentioned, this is a time to go through several of our policies. As you were reading the titles, I will also mention there will be some opportunity for us to determine if we keep that lettering system. I know how cumbersome it feels at times. That can be part of the discussion today as well if we get to it. Before General Counsel Envil begins, I want to commend her for finding the roadmap. If you recall, we had it in training with FSBA. We wanted to put something on the website so folks understand in general the difference between governance and management, and so we found the roadmap that we will add to the webpage as well. But I want to thank her because she is responsible. Between her and Mr. Howitt, actually found the FSBA document for us. That's a wonderful cover for policies. You have work to be done, so I will hand it over to General Counsel Enville.
Thank you, members of the board. Welcome. We are going to talk about school board governance. This is actually the roadmap. We're trying to figure out the best way to depict how things work. And so this is a really good image from FSBA. Hang on. Technical. Yeah, that's wonderful. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry. This is a really good pictorial depiction of what is. So governance, the school board is on the left, and on the right is the Superintendent Authority. So the board authority is to adopt vision and goals, to adopt policies, and to evaluate outcomes, and that's the oversight of management. And then it circles around at the top to evaluate progress, implement operations, and develop plans and regulations, and that's management, and that's recommendations on the superintendent. And it goes around in a cyclical manner. So if it was only that easy, that would be great, and we just had one side and one side of the road, but it's not. It's all intertwining. You have many different roads. Sometimes there's things that cross over. There's many statutes. There's your policies. There's rules that govern how everything is supposed to work. So anyway, but we thought this was a pretty good pictorial representation to start with. Today we're here to talk about the policy approval process. I've provided you all with a hard copy of a packet. It has our school board governance page on the front. Your next I think a lot of times what we've been having is how do our policies get adopted? I know you all know that too, but I think it's a really good time to go through how those, I think the last policy presentation you had was probably a year and a half ago. I think Ms. Fernandez did one for you. So I thought it was important to bring it back. And I also put it into, I think this needs to go on our website as well, just so everybody understands the process that it goes through. This all follows Chapter 120 of the Florida statutes, so it's all required. So the first step in a policy approval process is the identification, and it's either the school board will bring it to our attention, or the superintendent will, or I will. We'll identify new policies that need to be created in response to legislation, or existing policies that need to be revised. Our office at the Office of Legal Service, we facilitate the policy approval process, and we work with the cabinet member who oversees the areas that are in the policy, and we work with them to determine which staff members will help us in the policy revision process. Sometimes there's multiple cabinet members involved, so we have a bigger policy revision team. So in step 2, the policy revision team, we create a proposed policy if it's a new one that's required, and or we review existing policies. And when we're doing that, when we're looking at existing policies, we have a checklist that we follow. And a lot of things we look at is technical changes, formatting, spelling, grammar, terminology consistency. We're going to talk about that in one of our upcoming policies. You know, it's important to, once to sign it kind of like in a book, when you set forth the characters, make sure the characters stay the same and they have the same names throughout the entire process. We look for substantial changes. We want to make sure that the provisions are added or clarified to make sure it's clear. Lately, we've been adding some headings to each of our sections. And then we also look at all the specific authority, the laws, the rules, the statutes, everything that govern to make sure that they're clear. And that all goes into the policy revision process. Once the policy revision team works on those red line processes. We work with Legal Services, takes a review of it. We present it to Cabinet, those red lines, and get practical feedback from Cabinet members onto what this policy revision what kind of implications it might have across the district. Cabinet is very good to provide some impact and feedback, and they look at it. Sometimes when you're revising something, you get so entrenched in the weeds that you don't realize it doesn't make sense. So Cabinet's a really good sounding board to go back and forth with the policies to let us know whether the proposed policy revision makes sense. Once we do that, a work session. So work sessions we bring to you if it's a new policy that's being proposed, or if it's an existing policy that needs some further input and further direction. So today we have a work session. Work sessions are designed to have the board meet with staff to tell us what you want us to have the policy say. So that's why we're here today. Work session, we look on everything. We'll either schedule another work session for the policies, or we'll make the changes. If they're simple enough, we'll make them and we'll move it forward in the process to rule development workshop. Either way, it goes back to Cabinet one more time just to make sure that we're still clear with everything. Once it's approved by Cabinet, the Office of Legal Services, we prepare an advertisement. And it's important to know all this process is governed by Chapter 120, so we have to follow all this. If we know we want to put the advertisement in the paper on Sunday, we have to get that to the Orlando Sentinel by Wednesday. We advertise a minimum of 14 days after the advertisement for workshops and a minimum of 28 days after the advertisement for the school board meeting. So that's why it's so far out. When you see it on your schedule, you'll say, gosh, we had a work session a long time ago, but now what are we waiting for? Because we usually advertise for a little bit longer than 30 days, because depending on when the Wednesday and Sunday fall. I wanted to let you know, too, that just so you know, for advertising, it's all required by the statutes. But just so you know, Orlando Sentinel, from July 12th of 2021 to January 24th of 2022, we spent $15,730.75 on advertising for policies. So it's very expensive, but it's required by the statutes. So roughly about $30,000 a year with the Orlando Sentinel but like we discussed in a lot of our legislation, sometimes they haven't caught up with the different ways that we could advertise. We also put our policy revisions on the website as soon as we do them. And there is once we advertise, we send it to the union. In the very, very back of your packets, there is a settlement agreement I'm going to scoot down real quick. There's a settlement agreement with the CTA from February 13th of 2014 that requires the board, when recommending revisions to the district grading policy, attendance policy, and our code of student conduct, to provide CTA with written notice prior to the presentation of recommendations to the Orange County School Board. So we actually do that, but not only do we send notice to the CTA so they can pass it on to their memberships, but we also forward it to OSPA, and we also put it on the website. So they're all available for that. And those, when we do our red lines, you've seen the red lines, we put those on the website so everybody can see them. Moving forward to the rule development workshop, that's the public's first opportunity for input, and someone will present the policy during that, usually using a PowerPoint presentation, and then we get public input and/or further revisions from the board. If there are further substantial revisions, we start the process over and we have to re-advertise. If we only have technical changes, like let's say a word was spelled wrong or we need a comma somewhere or whatever, those we can make after the rule development workshop, and then we'll move forward to the school board meeting. And at the school board meeting, that's the public's second opportunity to provide input, and board can make any final changes it needs to then if it wants to, as long as they're technical. If they're substantive, we have to start the process over, and then the board does final approval. For those of you that are visual learners, sorry, the fourth grade teacher in me thought that this was probably pretty helpful. We created a flow chart so you can kind of see how they go. And there's some dotted lines that go back and forth depending on each one, but essentially that's a policy approval process in a nutshell. In your packets, you also have you have the statutory rulemaking authority. They call it rules, and you have that. We call them policies. If you're in a county, you call them ordinances. Municipality calls them ordinances. But at the school level, we call them policies. But they're essentially your rules. Rules are all. You can go ahead and read through this at your leisure. Everything is defined in both Section 120.54 and 120.52 that we provided to you. Moving forward, you have a very colorful depiction. You had asked me to bring forward a plan for revision for some of these policies. We have 222 policies. If you were to revise all of them every year, you would have to do 19 policies per meeting or per month. If you wanted to put them on a 2-year schedule, you'd have to do 9 policies per month. And so you can see it's a very aggressive plan. So what you have in front of you is a color-coded version of which policies were last revised in 1993, and those are the ones that we're trying to get through. You'll see a lot of them are very similar, the B policies, some of the B policies and everything. There was a substantial policy revision that occurred in 2008, and you'll see a lot of those are all here in yellow. Well, at least they're kind of yellow on my page. And then they go further, and they're all the way at the very end. We have the ones that we have adopted already this year. Haven't done a lot of policy adoptions this year just because we haven't needed to. We really haven't had a chance to, because with everything else going on. So I'd like to kind of up that schedule a little bit more and get some more policies done this year. So this is available, so you can see all 222 policies and see what they are. We have them broken down into the policy itself on the left, what it is called, and then the different sections that are in there too. One of the things that I want to do is revamp our website a little bit, because when you go to our policy approval page, you have to search through them. They're not searchable. They're not easy to find. So we have some plans to make that a little bit more user-friendly. One of the things that we can do is we can put them all into BoardDocs as well. I don't know if you've realized, but in BoardDocs there's a policy tab, and a lot of other districts use their policy tab, and we can do that as well. But there's some things that I want to do before we put them in there, because that's a huge project for someone to have to copy and paste and put everything in there. So, so we have a couple things that I'd like to do to make it easier for the public to find our policies. And as we do our policy revisions, we're going to bring some of them to you and recommend that some of them be repealed or combined into one. Like today, you're going to learn about 2 B policies that are about policies. Why not put them all in the same policy instead of having 2 separate ones for people to go to? So that's kind of, we're looking to combine. I would love to have around 150 policies total, because I think that's a little bit more manageable. But, with the legislation and stuff, we might need to have some more. So anyway, internally, just wanted to let you know, we, Office of Legal Services, each one of the policies is assigned to one of our attorneys to work with the department in revising it. And internally, this is just a sample of what we use. So you can see when the cabinet meeting was, when the workshop is, and on the left-hand side, we have our deadline. So we know we have to do deadline to BoardDocs for the workshop, when we do the advertisement, when we notify the CTA, and all those things. I just wanted you to see that we do have a internal tracking mechanism for each of those, so we know. And these are your next policies that are coming up for revision. Some of them are on your policy calendar, and some are not yet, because the dates they're just our hopeful ones to get to. So this is where I need your help when you see any of these. If there's others that you want us to take a look at, please let us know so we can add them. The ones with asterisks are the ones from 1993, so I'm trying to work those in there so we have them updated a little bit, because I'm guessing that some of those things, like student conduct on buses, I'm guessing that has changed since 1993. So anyway, so that's my presentation. I think I got through almost everything. Today we have a number of policies for you. Actually, can I stop? Is there any questions you have for me on the policy approval process? Okay. All right, so we're going to start with policy IJC. I'm going to click out of this. And we're going to start with Mr. Dragon, I believe, is going to start with you. I think.
IJC or IJL?
IJL, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I mixed it with KEC. And I'm going to explain to you why we have all these crazy lettering systems as we get through our policies, so. Yeah, I thought it was up here already.
I can go from the website.
Do you know how to get there?
The website, maybe. Go to the website, main website, there you go. Pull up the red line. Go to the board docs for today's board docs and pull up the red line so they can see the red line.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
There aren't any changes.
I'll do that real quick.
Okay.
BoardDocs.
Pull up today's meeting and then you can pull up the red line. I can see the red line.
IJL red line. Yeah, it wasn't very substantive, so here it is here. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent.
So there are two policies that I'm going to review with you today. The first one is policy IJL. Within policy IJL, this policy manages the library media and other reading material suggestions, our selection process. As far as any red line changes that were made to the policy, there was only one, which is in section 2 underneath the responsibilities for selection of materials. In that section, it previously said school board, and that was changed to say board. And then there were some very slight changes that were made as far as with adding a comma after the word program specialist. But outside of that, there were no other suggestions as far as formatting that were made to that policy. So to go over the policy overall, the policy talks about the objectives of selection when library media material is being added to a collection. And inside, you can see in the subsection A, B, C, D, and E there, how the things that we've put forward as far as what staff should look at when they are going to select a new materials for their library. Underneath that, it does have some responsibilities that should be looked at, and then the criteria that should be used inside of that selection process. Finally, towards the back, there are some considerations that are placed forward, and then a procedure for selection. The only other change that was really made is, as far as formatting, is towards the bottom where it has the specific authority. There were some updates made to make sure that the statutes that are listed are shown in numerical order. But outside of that, there were no other changes that were made.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Jenkins?
Just for clarity for the board, the only thing done at this point are just the technical adjustments. We are open to hearing the board's discussion around what you would like to see for potential revisions. Staff has not made any such recommendations at this point. I think it's also important to note, as Mr. Bixler reminded us yesterday, there is so much that may come down after the legislative session that will direct this policy as well. But it's a good time for us to start that discussion.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Dr. Jenkins, you're correct. Currently, actually, as we speak, several House bills and Senate bills are being discussed. And so the thought process on this was to go through both these policies, get your feedback and thoughts, and then as these bills wind through completion, then we can take your thoughts and what comes from the Senate and House action and then incorporate all that together.
Thank you, Mr. Bixler. Okay, let me, we're through with this policy right now. Take board comment, thank you. Vice Chair. Just me and you.
I was just looking for something, I couldn't find it. I want to just address the objectives of the selection in the first section. And while I agree that all of those 5 reasons that are there are all good reasons, obviously, for selecting books, I think being that one of our objectives in our strategic plan is the mental health of our students, I think that part of another good reason to select books for our libraries is to enhance the mental health and well-being of our students. And I don't really know, I had an example of how that could be worded, but I can't find it at the exact moment right now while I'm looking for it, of course. But something to the effect that would obviously, children, when they see themselves in the books or, the issues they're dealing with, may not have any specific, curriculum ties, but those are also important. So I would love to see that be one of the objectives in this section as well for selection.
If you email that to me, we'll most definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And following up on that, perhaps we could work into that to support their social emotional learning. And then include the language that you're talking about. I think it is the one thing that seems to be missing in terms of selection of materials. I have some questions on the first paragraph under responsibility for selection materials. I recognize we may be rewriting all of this, but when I read this, it says that the Materials shall be selected by professionally trained personnel employed by, you're going to change it to the board, which may include, doesn't say has to include, but may include, which means it might not include, which means not really sure who it will include because it's pretty vague from that standpoint, but not be limited to principals, teachers, program specialists, and media specialists. So if it's the goal to have those individuals, then I would suggest we change the word may to shall. But if that's not the goal, I just want to make sure we're all clear that the sentence really doesn't say anything about who will be on there, just who might be on there. Coordinating the selection of educational materials and recommending purchases shall be the responsibility of the professional trained personnel. Fine with that. Criteria for the selecting. I was a little confused when I read it about who's actually responsible for the decision of what goes into the library. So it says that the coordination or coordinating the selection of the materials and recommending purchase shall be the responsibility of professionally trained media personnel. So I guess that's just a statement, but at the end of the day, I wasn't entirely certain of who's accountable for making that final decision. And you know what? This might get addressed in the latest version of one of the bills. I think the principal ultimately is going to be responsible. So,
Okay.
I also, and I know this is going to be misinterpreted, but when under 2A, standards to determine the propriety of the library material and other reading materials shall be in accordance with 1006.34. I'm not sure it's obviously here, so it should be known by everyone who's reviewing materials and selecting materials, but that does specifically preclude pornography, any materials that contain pornography. And I'm just not sure that that's been abundantly clear. And I'm pointing it out because it's in the law, and whether we agree with what's in the law or not, it's in the law. So it seems like maybe we could be more transparent about that so that everybody that reads this, but I would want to point back to that it comes from the statute.
Right.
Not that it's a board decision because I think there's been some discussion of what level of pornography is okay at what age. And the problem with that is in the law, the answer is none. But then the other problem with that is that whoever it was who said pornography, you know it when you see it, wasn't living today, apparently. Wasn't, huh? Yeah. I don't think there's any universal agreement on what constitutes pornography, but I do think it ought to be more clearly spelled out here so that it's clear to everyone who reads the policy what is in the law. And of course, that's going to carry over to what becomes law fairly soon, which we're all going to, I think most of us here are going to have some consternation over, but I think it's still better to have it obvious in our policies what we own and what is put upon us. So with that, Member Cobert, I thought you wanted to be recognized. Did you change your mind?
I did, but I think my comments belong more with the KEC policy.
Gotcha. Understood. All right, let's move on to KEC then.
Just real quick. Chair Jacobs, this has quite a few changes. Would you like us to go by section, or you want us to read through the whole, what would be the best?
These are your technical changes?
Correct.
Yeah, just go through all of them, I think.
Certainly. So in policy KEC, there were more substantive technical changes, but these changes were made to increase the consistency in the document more than changes to change the actual policy itself. And so the wording was added to say that the School Board of Orange County establishes the following procedures. And then you'll notice that there were some sections that were added because this policy really is in 4 chunks. And so this, or in several chunks. So the sections were added to make sure that it was clear as someone was reading it, which part of the policy or which part of the process they were in. So the first one is the initiation of a challenge. And one of the first changes you'll see there is that the word citizens is scratched and the word concerned is scratched. And part of the thinking behind it is that throughout the policy, there was an inconsistent way of identifying the person who was bringing forward the challenge. And there was inconsistent terminology used as far as naming the challenge. In some places it was called a challenge, in some places it was called an objection, in some places it was called a concern. And so the word challenge was chosen as the consistent term to use moving forward, and the name individual was used as a consistent terminology moving forward to make sure that as you were reading it, you knew that it was the individual that was bringing it forward, and it was the challenge that they were bringing forward. So that's what you see in in that first section of the initiation of a challenge. Really a lot of just terminology changes to make sure that there's consistency in identifying the individual and the challenge they're bringing forward. Another title was added, which was the School Literacy Council. And this leads now into the section that talks about the procedures at the school-based level of appeal. And there were some changes that were made there to identify the folks that were actually notified once this part of the process was initiated. Previously, it only had there the appropriate area superintendent, but we do have some learning communities that have associate superintendents. And we also have the chief of high schools that's over high schools. And so we wanted the language there to accurately reflect who would be notified. And then we also had that added inside of here that there should be a non-voting staff member to guide the process. That is, as we've gone through the District Literacy Council component, a piece that we have found that is a helpful part of the process, so that was added in there. There are just some changes as things are being moved around to make it consistent as far as with the numbering and the lettering. But as it goes down, it does add in there in the section 3 here that the School Literacy Council would consider the specific challenges and that the non-voting member would help with setting the timeline. And that was a change from where it just said principal. Added inside of here, which is added based upon expectations with laws are going to come into effect, is that the meeting of the School Literacy Council shall be open to the public. However, the public shall not be entitled to provide input at these meetings. And so this is in line with requirements that will be coming in place in July that basically puts these meetings underneath sunshine.
Actually,
Okay, I think-
Mr. Dragon, that's currently a requirement that they have
Current
to be in
requirement, I
sunshine.
apologize.
But I believe, and general counsel need to research this, I believe that if they're under sunshine, that you have to take public comment. I'm quite certain of it. We need to look into this.
Hi, Madam Chair. I'm obviously not general counsel, but we've looked into this. So when we looked at this, obviously a decision could be made at any one of these various places to turn down a book. So that's why we decided to be open to the public. But we didn't think that public comment was appropriate at either the school or district literacy council level, because eventually if it got appealed high enough, it would come before this board under the current version of the policy. And when it comes before this board, obviously there would be public comment because it would be an agenda item, at which point the public could comment on it. We have not seen any requirement anywhere else in the law with respect to having public comment at these lower level councils.
Okay.
We have following that the finding is a matter of public record, and that the transmission of that finding would be to the area superintendent, the associate superintendent, chief of high schools, and that the principal would inform the individual that put in the challenge. And also that in writing, the associate superintendent of curriculum would also then inform the superintendent and the board in writing of the decision. Most of the substantive updates that were made there were updates to make sure that the titles that were listed were titles that were in line with the titles that folks currently have. Then a new section there, the title, the District Literacy Council. Added in there is the updates that were made again to make the language consistent, such as calling the person putting in the challenge the individual instead of a complainant. And then, although there's a strikeout of the part that says that the committee member shall not be selected from the school where the challenge of the materials originated, that was simply struck out from 1 because it was moved down to 2, just to make it flow better. But it was not a change to remove that from the process. There in 2, it goes through that process of the District Literacy Council, and it also adds in that designation of the non-voting staff member. Outlined in that section 3 is the deliberation of the challenge materials, and inside that deliberation, there are just changes again to make the language consistent. And again, the language there to say that it will be open to the public. The language there in 5, this was changed, and it was changed to make it also match the language that from above with the school literacy council as far as the folks that will be informed of the decision. The decision, the associate superintendent of curriculum will be the person here making informing the individual that put in the complaint, and will also be informing the superintendent and the school board. And then finally, a new title was added, but the section is still there on the appeal to the board. And in the appeal to the board, there is changes that are made there to just make it flow better, as far as saying that if the individual disagrees with the decision made from the District Literacy Council and it's not satisfactory, then it comes to the board for review. You already have the School Literacy Council decision that's part of the written record that's already been provided to the board from when that decision was made. So that was struck from this section is because it would not need to be provided again. And then the major changes that are underneath as far as the specific authority, again, that was made to take the statutes and put them in numerical order, and there was not a need for laws implemented because those were the statutes. So that was struck out from underneath the bottom.
Mr. Bixley, you open for comments? All right, thank you. Member Colbert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm uncertain if this is the right place to bring this up, but I think it is because it's concerns about instructional resources. I am wondering if the board would be willing to consider an opt-out option for parents, where they have 3 options. Some other school districts around the state have done this, where they would either have full access to materials in school libraries as one option. 2, a parent could flag on their student's library card up to a certain number of books that their child will not have access to. Or finally, the most restrictive access, where parents would have to approve books that their child checked out. I've looked at a couple of other counties. Flagler is one. I think this might be a protective policy, give parents some peace of mind. So I don't know if this could be rolled into this policy or would need to be a new policy. But I'm wondering, I'd like to hear the thoughts from the rest of the board.
Thank you, Member Colbert. So, Member Gallo, you're queued up next. Before I go to another subject, can we, Member Gallo, can we stay focused on Member Colbert and just take input from her thoughts? And if so, do you have any input you'd like to provide back to the suggestion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I've actually been reviewing those counties as well. I've intentionally looked at Flagler because they kind of came out of the curve on it in terms of opting out and proposing what Member Colbert just suggested. I've actually sent some information to the superintendent. I am in agreement with Member Colbert. I think that we need to provide a parent opt-out. I think the parents have a right to choose material that they feel is appropriate for their child. That's our right as parents. But what they may consider to be appropriate may not be the same thing that another parent would consider to be appropriate. So while I think this is a good way to make sure that parents have a say in what their children's reading without imposing themselves on other parents' children. So I'm in agreement with what Member Colbert says, and I'd like to see us review it as well.
All right, thank you, Member Gallo. I have a potential revision or alternative to also put out there, if I could put that on the table also, just for input as we go through this. Because, Member Gallo, I want to come back to you also on the issue of also giving the parents the more restrictive option of their students can't check out anything without their pre-approved permission. So I want to get your input on that. The other, I looked at Flagler also. One of the things I thought might be somewhat difficult, and I really have not landed the plane in my own mind on what the best thing is to do, and that's what I love about coming together with this board, is sometimes when something sounds really good and enough of us hash it over, it can sound really bad, or vice versa. So, so take this where it's coming from as a possible option would be for us to identify material that we think has a mature content and allow parents to elect that their children have access to mature content or don't without having to identify specific titles. Would put a great deal more burden on the district to identify what is mature. And certainly, Dr. Jenkins, we'd want to hear from the cabinet about what avenues and what resources are out there to kind of independently determine what is a mature audience. But that would be another possible avenue for parents to have input, not necessarily instead of what you're suggesting, but perhaps in addition to. So if I can put that on the table as well, Member Gallo, you're still in the queue to answer the question how you feel about what are now 3 different options. You've weighed in on one. The second one, parents have to pre-approve materials, and I think we're primarily referring now to media center materials. And then the third being the district identifies mature, and parents opt their children into mature materials or out of mature materials, just one way or the other. Your thoughts on those two?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm in agreement. I like the mature content solution that you brought up. I believe that was one of the considerations or the recommendations with the book that was just reviewed, right? That we were going to possibly tag it as mature content so that we were being very transparent to the content of that book. So I would like to hear from Cabinet on how much work that would cause and an opt-in or opt-out. On the restrictive books, as long as, my concern would be just books that are attached to curriculum, because I believe that at some point in time, if we haven't already, we're going to get challenges on books that are used to meet standards or in our curriculum, especially in English language arts, and what would be the process if a parent didn't want their child to read a book, then would we offer an alternate book? Would they still be able to participate in the coursework? So how would that look like, or what would that work would be one of my questions. But I think these are all great recommendations. I just, I think whatever we do has to be extremely transparent so that parents understand the process, what we're doing, so that they can make the best decision for their student. So yeah, I'm in agreement. I do want to circle back after we talk about these things, just to talk about the overall policy, because I do have some ideas on that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to Vice Chair Byrd, and I'm taking everybody in the order that you all were queued.
Member Colbert.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Member Colbert, please. Thank you.
Member Gallo, I've seen that play out recently at my daughter's school, where there was a book assigned that a parent was uncomfortable or did not want her child to participate in the lesson with that book, and the teacher provided alternative books that the student could read and then write the paper on. So that does happen, and that is, in my experience, worked out between the teacher and the parent. So.
Okay, and I'm going to go to Dr. Jenkins to comment on these. I'm sorry, I'm also creating my own little chart over here to keep track of who's on first, but go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to mention the same thing. We have a provision, if a parent finds a book that is a class assignment to be objectionable, that the teacher will assign a different and alternative book or an alternative assignment. So that's not unusual. I think this is also one of those points, as Mr. Bixler mentioned, a lot of the determination around parents opting in and out and helping with the selection of materials is what we're waiting to see come out of the legislative session. So we would be preemptive to assume, I can almost, I could probably predict some of what's going to come out of the legislative session. So it will be helpful for us to get guidance from there. I do believe sometimes well-intentioned efforts by the legislature may cause untenable results or extensive efforts on the part of districts when they actually try to enforce them. And so we will certainly give a look at what comes down from Tallahassee. Member Gallo also mentioned wondering how much effort it would take by staff. It's probably premature to indicate that. Some review of all of our books and determining which ones are of mature content will be labor intensive, but it's probably too soon to say how much labor it would actually take to get it done and what expertise would be necessary. But we can certainly have that simmering as we wait on the legislative session.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. All right, let me go to Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I'm going to answer the question at hand, but then I have some comments about the policy. I am in full agreement with the idea of letting parents opt their child out of certain books from the library. Because as soon as I heard that idea from other districts, I thought it was a very good idea, because we have 200,000 students, all of them from different families. There is no way we are going to have a set of books in the library that every one of those families finds appropriate or wants their child to read. It's just, there's this, and I think the environment that we're in, it's just going to continue being more divisive. So I think the idea of allowing parents that are uncomfortable with certain materials or don't want their children exposed to it, they should have the right to have their child not exposed to it. But at the same time, I do not want to see those books out of the hands of children that need them. So I'm in full agreement with that. I wish there was some kind of just rating system like for movies, where they came out and they're, rated R, or even television shows have TV 14 or whatever, TV 17. If there was just some kind of, if there's any organization, and I'm sure, that's what staff will be looking at, that does some kind of, rating, if we could find one, that's my only concern is then I don't want to see us start getting challenged as to what's going to be labeled mature. And so if we could find some kind of organization that does this already, that it's respected, established, and then we just use that as our guide, I think that would take us out of the equation and make it easier. And then I had a question following up on Member Colbert when she said that, the teachers will replace. Is that something that's just practice, or is that in policy somewhere that teachers do that?
It's in practice.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Again, I'm taking everybody in the order they're in right now for comment on this, and then I'm going to come back through because I know you all have other comments unrelated to this suggestion. So, Member Felder, you're recognized to give us input on these three options that we're discussing.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank Board Member Colbert for bringing to our attention some of the other districts and looking how they handle books. I'm totally against censorship. However, having taught the number of years that I've taught in Orange County and being an ELA teacher, having books that were questionable, and as a teacher, Member Byrd, I sent letters to parents explaining what the book would be entailing. It was a book that I chose that had a section on sodomy, and I wanted the parents to know when they came to the first initial open house. I had the book out. I answered questions. I talked with them, and of the last 10 or more years that I taught the book, there's been a total of maybe 3 parents who did not allow, and I gave them a fresh alternative for the children, for their child to read, and it was just so. It was such an easy task because it is important that you consider parents. We are helping them, but you must still consider that they do have the final word when it comes to their children. However, their children are left to our control for 7.5 hours every day, with the exception of Saturday and Sunday. We have that control. So it would behoove us to give them that opportunity. I specifically, again, we're going to have to wait until we hear from our state legislature in terms of how we're going to do a lot of this policy. But I think if we're already on board in our minds as a board to think about if we have that option, to give the parents an opportunity to choose and trust the teachers that we've hired, that they will make feasible and rational decisions about books that they're going to read, at the same time not getting in the way of any type of learning experiences for some of our children who may have the only outlet they have is to read the books in their English classes because they have been barred from from home to read or to even watch TV and so forth. So I hope and I believe that because we're having this deliberation as a board, I do believe that whatever we decide, that it would be a good decision, because discussion is important, but I want to just stand on the record that having those 3 options that Board Member Colbert mentioned, those are some things that I'm in agreement that parents have that opportunity. And then I want to leave with this. The teachers that we've hired in this county, they are intelligent enough to make a decision and to allow the parents to have some input. I need you to know that. I'm coming out of that environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Felder. And one of the things I think your example of being very transparent with parents, inviting them to the discussion rather than reacting to it is exactly, I think, why you had the success that you had. And no, I'm serious. And I think to the extent that we can take that same approach, and it reminds me of the feedback we've gotten from Florida Freedom to Read, the emails and the suggestions there about put the information out, make it very public, what's been challenged, what the results are of those challenges. And that will also help our parents if they're looking at what material might I want to look more carefully at. They don't just pull up a list of books and see thousands of books, but they have a place to go where they may want to say, well, if that was challenged, do I want to think about that? But I think with regard to the first suggestion, of parents identifying books. I'm comfortable with that. The third suggestion, that if we could find a way, and I like the point that was made, I think it was Vice Chair, about being the independent way of identifying mature content, that it would be ideal if we could find an independent source. And then, and it looks like, Member Colbert has pulled something up on her laptop. I don't know what, but it might be helpful based on the body language that I see coming from you, and we'll come to you in just a minute. The one concern that I have about the approach of allowing parents to pre-approve any material their students have, the one concern I have is that we have some very, very busy parents. And I'm not saying that all parents are busy, and I'm not saying that busy is a reason not to be engaged, but we have some parents that are extremely taxed. And if you are a single mom or a single dad and you are homeless and you are just trying to figure out how to get your child into school the next day and to figure out whether you're going to sleep at a friend's house or you're going to sleep in the car, deciding what books your child can read and pre-approving those books is just one too big of a burden. Now, in most cases, I would think parents would just, in that case, would just say, just let my child read whatever. But I would have a little bit of concern about a parent who is like, in the absence of being able to approve, they've given me this responsibility, I'm not in a position to exercise it responsibly, therefore, better safe than sorry, my child won't read anything. So I do have a little concern about that approach for that reason alone. And that's where I think the other approach of being able to say, here's the general material in the library that is not mature content, and do you want to opt out of this other material, would make it easier on. It's amazing how incredibly committed a lot of our parents are, and they have the ability to be there, but some of them don't, and I don't want our kids to miss out accordingly. So that would be my one reservation there. Let me go to Member Gould. Oh, wait, can you answer you pulled up something and there's a picture of somebody.
Yeah, so when the question was asked, is there a national book rating system or trusted entity out there? There are a few, and I think that as we work through this potential addition to the policy, that's where staff can help guide us. There are some that review books and give it a rating based on age. And then we can also probably look to the American Library Association. I think there are some entities out there that are doing some of this work.
Thank you. And before I recognize Member Gould, there was one other thing I did want to add. One of the reasons I think that the suggestions are very valuable, I am quite certain that what will come out of this is the ability for parents to sue and the district to have full responsibility for those legal costs. And I think that the legislation is likely to be as clear as mud. And hence, there will be lawsuits, and we will only find out what's meant by the law through court cases. As a result of that, I think what we can do to eliminate some of those cases by allowing parental input, but as you all are all discussing, doing it in a way where that parent is not having control over all of the other students in the school, just having some responsibility and authority over what their children are able to read will hopefully strike the balance that we're going to need to strike in order to be to serve all of our children well and to do it without unnecessary litigation. Member Gould.
So I would be in favor of the opt-out and looking at, the age appropriate. I think that's in most books that I used to screen for my kids. And quite frankly, it was an opportunity to talk to them about usually timely content that was going on in the community or socially in the world. And it was our opportunity to really open up the communication channels on that. And I would never, ever want to take that ability away from parents. It's hard enough to get communication opportunities with your children about very pertinent things, and that utilizing a tool like that is often great. The flip side of that is you may have a child that's not maturing as fast or is ready for some content that you don't feel would be appropriate yet for them. And as a parent, you should have a right to opt out of that content, as Member Felder talked about, and that's all about just great communication. So I don't want to make it burdensome for the parent or for the team, and I don't want it to be so hard to get books into kids' hands, or make them too curious about books that we don't want them to read quite yet as parents. So, I think it's kind of like when you say, don't look at that picture, you can't help but to look at the picture because it's just human nature. So I think the easier we can make it, and certainly the tools we have with Canvas and all the online progress checking and reporting, there's much more efficient ways now to be communicating with families about those books, especially if they're in the curriculum, built into the curriculum, not just on the bookshelves. So the technology's kind of caught up with this too.
Mm-hmm. Member Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The opt-out. I believe that we cannot do it in every classroom. For example, because I'm thinking about AP classes, for example. If I think about AP literature, we have a certain amount of books, and nobody can opt out because based on the content of that specific book, of that specific title, they're going to be evaluated to receive those credits. So I think that the policy should include something about if, parents cannot opt out on these cases because of these reasons. Because in AP literature, you don't have the choice of, I'm thinking about my AP literature, for example. We have different type of titles, but I can not opt out from the books that they're going to be evaluated. They have comparison. Even if we think about this, it's not only books, it's also arts appreciation. Is also it's so many things and involved in terms of. I want to be politically correct, but I can't. But I think that we have different opinions in reference to the books. We have conservative parents. We have more progressive parents. We're gonna have a very difficult situation in trying to please every parent, and I also think that it's going to be a lot of work for teachers when we have a group of parents complaining because they don't want his child or her child to read that specific book. So now I have this alternative book. No, I don't like it either. I want another one. So this is another no, because so I don't know to which extent we're going to allow the parents to decide how the teachers are going to teach. I don't want to sound redundant, but I'm thinking in Spanish most of the time. That's my native language. And also the terminology mature. The terminology mature for me is kind of confusing because appropriateness make more sense to me in terms of age. But the mature, are we talking about also inclusion? Because the policy is not providing the opportunity to be inclusive and respect diversity. That's the way I see it. Maybe I am wrong, but I just see a very general policy, but I would love to hear more from my board members.
Absolutely. That's certainly not what I think we're talking about. But Member Colbert, you wanted to respond, and then let me call on Dr. Jenkins also.
I just wanted to clarify, Member Lopez, when I brought this up, it was with reference to the media center, not with reference to curriculum, the teacher's choice of books in the classroom. That's where Mr. Bixler was talking about that provision, which happens on rare occasions. But I was talking with specifics to checking books out of the library.
Dr. Jenkins, did you want to respond?
Thank you. I think Member Lopez brings up a critical point, and actually, Member Felder had mentioned the same thing to me privately. So there will be an issue because AP courses, advanced placement courses, are college-level courses that our students are allowed to take, and when they take the exam at the end of the year, they can actually earn college credit recognized by most institutions. That is a national curriculum by the College Board, and so we would not be able to alter that particular curriculum. Member Lopez, I suppose what we'd have to say to individuals is if you want the advanced placement courses, which will give you college credit, you are agreeing to the prescribed curriculum. You cannot alter College Board's curriculum because then you won't be able to pass the exam. It's a waste of resources. So I suspect, unless something different comes out of the legislature, that there'll have to be some carve-outs. If you want a college-level course, advanced placement course, then you have to agree to their particular curriculum. I don't know how you can get around that. I'm glad you raised that issue.
Mr. Bixler, did you want to comment also?
No, Superintendent Jenkins and I have talked about this. Ms. Lopez, you're correct. Depending on what comes to the legislature, you think about AP courses, IB courses, dual enrollment courses. So we'll have to navigate that as those things begin to come through.
And I want to, if I want to respond, because also the word mature content, I threw that out. That may not be the right word to use. I think we need to figure out what that is. But certainly it was not my thinking, I don't think any of us were thinking, that subject matters wouldn't be, that diversity wouldn't be welcome included in our library. That's not part of this is mature, or this is, I don't know what other term we might use, but I think there is material that appeals to all types of diversity that would still be in the library. And if not, I think we're all going to have a problem. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because if that's what we ended up with as a result of our language, so we need to make sure that we work through that, to prevent that from being misinterpreted as, again, I don't know what the other term would be, but that's why we have a great cabinet to brainstorm this and see if they can come up with some other language. All right, Member Gallo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a few things. First off, I want to touch on what was mentioned about current legislation going through Tallahassee. I agree, and I believe it was you, Madam Chair, who mentioned that we're going to have to review it and that it'll probably play out in court. And I believe you're right, because I think if you look at the bill in its current form, the intent of the bill is very vague. People have asked a lot of questions in committee because the intent of these laws are vague, and usually when that happens, it's really hard to get clear guidance from the Department of Education, because they're not the judicial system, and they're trying to figure out intent along with us. And so I think it's imperative that we do make sure that we are getting parents' opinions up front, that we're very transparent. I believe one board member mentioned about being transparent with the information when it goes through committee so that it's online. I would love to see every book that is challenged, the outcome on what that committee decided, the verbiage. I know that it goes to the school board, there's some policy that it goes to the school board, and then it goes to others within the district. But I think that information needs to be posted on the website. I think any book that comes to the district level to be reviewed should be videotaped. I understand that we may not be taking comments from the public, but it should be able to be viewed or reviewed at home, just in an effort to be transparent. I have faith in our district committees, but I think that the more information that we could put out, the more transparent that we are with parents, the better off they will be to make educated decisions for their students. So I wanted to put that out there. I also wanted to talk about the mature content. I agree that maybe that's not the best verbiage to use, but I know we could probably do like an age appropriate, maybe like this is age appropriate for 16 above. I don't know if the information that Member Colbert found online is that detailed where we can maybe put an age level of what's appropriate, not appropriate, so that it would be very clear that if you're under 16, 14, whatever it is, this content may be a little more mature for you, and that would kind of clue the parents into maybe reviewing that before allowing a child to read it, or maybe that would be a book that they would say, well, I want to opt out anything that's not on their, that's not age appropriate for them, as however we rank them. And then I wanted to talk about the third, the restrictive part. I hear what you're saying about that restrictive part about having parents opt in, Chair. And so I'm wondering if it would be better just to create like a two-tiered system where parents are opting out, give them the choice to opt out versus opting in. And I didn't know if that would create even further problems. So that one is the only one that I would like to need to mull over, think about a little bit more. But other than that, I think it's as transparent as we can be, putting stuff on our website as soon as something goes through committee, that we make that available to our community, to our parents. I think that in these committees, we need to have parents on the committees. I know that we've listed in this policy who sits on the committee, and what I didn't see listed is parent involvement. And I think that it's important that we have parents involved in this process and in the book review process. So that's my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gallo. Vice Chair Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. So just to add to what has been said, I think that, as you said, Chair, parents are busy. Our media specialists are also very, very busy, especially many of them have to deal with the technology at the school as well, and the computers. And so I do not think that this needs to be something cumbersome. It needs to be super easy. And I agree with, I don't want to see kids left out. So I don't like the idea of opting in to anything. I think if there are parents that this is a concern, that they have to be the ones to initiate the opt-out. And I think it could be something relatively easy. As Member Gould said, we already have the, Skyward, there's an easy way to tag students. We could even do it through that if we needed to, and attach it to their library services where it just pops up on the screen, when they go to check out a book. As far as, the policy, and I think you mentioned, Chair, the email that we got from the Florida Freedom to Read. There is a policy, a sample policy in that, there was a sample policy in that email, and it was titled Resource Material Reconsideration Policy. And what they did is they got it from the New Jersey Library School Association of School Librarians, and they adapted it a little bit. And there were some things in that policy that I thought were really good. It was way more detailed than our policy, and I think that, there's obviously some of it that I feel might be more operational instead of policy, but some of the things that I thought were really good was that it was very explicit to how a parent would handle an issue they had. So now it's kind of, we say go to the principal or whatever, but this was way more detailed. It was, if a parent feels this way, step one. And this is what they recommended in this policy, was that first you start with your teacher or your school librarian and have a conversation. And really, our media specialists are so knowledgeable about these books and these resources. I think if we directed parents to go to them first with their concerns about a book, it could be resolved at that level, and so there's steps in there. And then step two, go to the school administrator and have a meeting with the school administrator. It doesn't say directly to file the form and complaint. Have a meeting and have the principal has to set up the conference within 10 days. And, there's a lot of details about that. Then if you're not satisfied, then you request an appeal of the principals, or then you'd go through the committee, and then they also very clearly identify who is on the committee, and that's one thing. And ours, I think, it's a little bit vague. I think we need to be a little clearer. And they have the media specialist, the principal, one teacher, not including a teacher if they're involved, if it's like something a teacher is using. One parent or legal guardian, not the one bringing the complaint, and one student representative, which I also think is a great idea to have a student. And then it goes, and then it talks about going on. So I love the way it's very detailed. And there was also, and I think it may have been Member Lopez that talked about inclusivity. And there's a little section at the beginning of this policy that they sent us that says, talking about the parent or legal guardian should use the following procedures, but then it says challenged materials shall remain in the library, just like we say. But then it says no challenged material may be removed solely because it presents ideas that may be unpopular or offensive to some, which I thought was a pretty unique statement that kind of gives the impression that we obviously want to be inclusive of everyone and their different viewpoints within our district. So anyway, I think I sent that to you. I'm sure you already got it from somebody else too, but I really like a lot of those things in that policy. So I would like for those to be reviewed too.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I agree with you. I think one of the things I loved about that when I read it was it started with a conversation. We're missing the opportunity just to sit down and have a conversation. And I like that language about that you just referenced, but I would also like to see the language, I think it is in here, but I was just looking for it. The language that was in that constitutional challenge. Mr. Palmerini, you're standing up, so you'll know the language, that you can't ban material from your libraries based on the content. Can you come to the mic? I don't remember the exact language, but I would like to see it in there because it's important that it be clear to people that you might not like the content, but pornography we're not allowed to have, but content that makes some uncomfortable is not a basis for restricting a book to the entire school.
So the language that you're referring to is the Board of Education versus PICO case. You all have seen that. It's a United States Supreme Court case. That's the one that split 4-1-4. 4 people were for the Constitution, 4 justices for the constitutional holding, 4 against, and 1 in the middle who just said, this needs to go back. We don't need to decide it. So, but what that language said is, our Constitution does not permit the official suppression of ideas. Thus, whether the petitioner's removal of books from school libraries denied respondent their First Amendment rights depends upon the motivation of the petitioner's actions. If the petitioner intended by their removal to deny respondents access to ideas with which the petitioners disagreed, and if this intent was the decisive factor in petitioner's decision, then petitioners have exercised their discretion in violation of the Constitution. Now remember, that just got 4 justices, so it's not the official holding, but most of the cases do say that you can't just remove it because you don't like the ideas that are in the book. But they say you can remove books if they contain things like obscenity, vulgarity, especially when in consideration of the age of the children involved.
Right. And even I recognize obscenity, vulgarity, pornography, all of those are judgment calls. I think it's important that somewhere in here we incorporate the idea that it's not, when the part of the decision making is not based on comfort level with the ideas, because that goes to the diversity point that you raised that I think we're missing in this, and we all know what we're thinking, but if it's not in writing, we don't know what somebody down the road is going to think we were thinking, and it could be misinterpreted. One thing that's missing in here, there's a lot of detail in I'm sorry, that was from New Jersey, was it? Yeah, there's a lot of detail, and we generally try not to put that much policy or detail in the policy. But I think that our policy could reflect that that details need to be what would be the form that you would, what would be the term for it, that you would put those details in? Your procedures. But one thing that isn't in, I don't even think it's in their procedures, is I don't see any time limits. Am I missing that? Because it does seem to me that if you appeal, I mean, if you file a complaint, if you're the individual, you're not the complainant, you're the individual, that there ought to be some expiration on an appeal process. Yes?
There was, a book could not be appealed within 5 years.
Couldn't be appealed within, but what wasn't clear to me is, so you got turned, the book got put back on the shelves, say, at the school level. I don't think in our policy, there's a period of time by which you would have to make a decision to appeal it to the district, or the appeal, or the complaint just, what's the word, terminates. So I think we should establish a time. I don't want 3 years later, somebody come back and say, I'm going to appeal that.
Right.
And
That makes sense.
yeah. And again, I don't believe that needs to be in the policy, but I think the policy needs to create the authority for the superintendent to develop procedures, like the legislature could have done for the governor when it came to mask mandates for our students, which they ultimately did, but not in time. So let's put that in our policy up front. Let's go to Dr. Jenkins. Do you have anything else?
Madam Chair, I only had one question. I was trying to take copious notes, and when Member Gallo, if she's still on the line, mentioned a two-tiered process, she lost me there. I wasn't sure I captured what she was thinking about when she said a two-tiered process. That was my only question.
Yeah, let's go back to her, because I was also trying to, and when it came to Member Gallo, I think I know, but let's go back to Member Gallo. Member Gallo, you still with us?
Yes, Madam Chair. So what I was referring to is I know that Member Coburn had listed like 3 things. And so when I was referring to like the 2-tier process, I was really referring maybe we just look at 1 and 2. And I wasn't sure how I felt about 3, the more restrictive piece.
Okay, so I have them as, I have the numbers differently, but we have the least restrictive of the restrictive, which would be the parent identifies specific books. The most restrictive is the parent doesn't allow any checking out of books without permission in advance, and the middle ground being that the district in some way identifies books of certain age levels, and parents then can opt their children out of certain age levels that they might find inappropriate, or opt in, which I don't know if we ever landed the plane on opt in or opt out. Okay, so your question was on the one that that children couldn't take out any books without first having approval from the parent, right?
Yes, that was the one I had issue with, just for some of the reasons cited by other members. That seems very restrictive, and I think an opt-out policy would be more beneficial.
Gotcha. Okay.
And less restrictive.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we have necessarily 5 votes on that, but I think there's some common degree of concern around that approach, unless we handle it differently. Okay. We are finished with this subject for the time being. We're not finished, but we're finished for the time being. And let's move on to the next policy. Mr. Palmerini, I saw you stand up. Yes, sir.
So just as food for thought when we're doing this, when you talked about maturity, probably would be best to track the statutory language in 1006-28 where they talk about whether material is pornographic, prohibited under 847.012, is not suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented, or is inappropriate for the grade level and age group with which the material is used. That way you're tracking directly what the legislature is stating would be the criteria upon which a parent could choose to challenge some sort of material.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I thought you were suggesting that you could opt in to those books.
No. I was just saying when you all said mature,
yes,
and that wasn't the term you were looking for, I was going for, hey, this is probably the way to phrase it, and it's compliant with the statute.
Yeah, what
That's
we
all.
were talking about is if we were going to give parents, and you and I discussed this, the option of, here's GP material, and here's some more adult material. Do you want your child to have access to that or not? That's where I use the term mature, and the question is mature right? So I don't know what the term is.
So like if the publisher of the book says, for example, this contains mature is that what you're referring to?
I was referring to that because I know that sometimes they refer to adult content or mature content, and we're kind of wrestling with, is that the right terminology? And basically, we're remanding this back to the cabinet and the superintendent to give a lot of thought to what they've heard from the board and come back to us. We've got some half-baked ideas. Doesn't mean that they're not good in a sense of half-baked. It's just that they're not finished. Literally half-baked, not figuratively. Okay? And your job is to not only finish baking them, but make them delicious when we're done. Member Gallo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think before we move on, that I wanted to bring up the IMB policy. I know it was one of the things that was mentioned in the Florida Freedom to Read. I think that policy kind of goes hand in hand with KEC and IJL in the form of how it's written, and I think we need to look at that and reviewing that policy as well. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Member Gallo, and I'm glad you did. This is timely for us to have that discussion. I did check with Ms. Enval to make sure there's no reason we can't have a discussion. This would not count as our work session in terms of if we were going to make any changes, we would still have to go through this process again and start with a work session. But it's certainly appropriate for conversation. So Mr. Bixler is jumping at the mic here, and Ms. Enval is at the podium as well. I'm explaining because Member Gallo is not here with us present.
Yes, Chair Jacobs, Ms. Gallo is correct. There's a couple of policies. One of them is IMB, and the other one is actually IJ, that deals with the allocation of instructional materials. And some of the statutes that are being discussed now at the legislature will impact both of those. And so what Ms. Enval and I talked about was when we begin to, once everything is passed and voted on and we know the outcome, we can maybe look at combining some of these policies together and streamlining them. Instead of having 4, maybe narrow that down. So we do understand the IMB and IJ will need to be addressed also. We'll bring those back and work on those as well.
All right, wonderful. And, one of the things that we might consider doing, because we're going to decide whether we're keeping this system or not, I understand the value of the system from the fact that other districts use this and everybody knows where to go, but perhaps we can find a way to code them so that people that are looking at them from the outside can figure out what policy might I go to find some of this content so that we're not stuck with something that feels a bit antiquated but has value. So it may be a translation mechanism of some sort. All right, we're ready to move on. Ms. Enval, did you have anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Next policy.
All right, ready to go.
Please hold while I switch back to the other red line. And remind me I need to announce the executive session at the end. Please remind me to do that.
Oh, yes.
I can do that now if you'd like.
Let me remind you to announce the executive session before I forget.
I have my blue folder out here, so I'm hoping it reminds me when we're done.
Why don't you announce it now?
I can announce it now.
Let's
I was
do
just
it
going
now.
to try to find the...
Pardon me? I know.
Okay.
Because I'd already forgotten.
Okay, I'm good because that's pulled up. Okay. So we're going to take a little break. Squirreling a little bit. I need to announce an executive session pursuant to Section 286.011, subsection 8 Florida statutes, and in accordance with Board Policy BEC. An entity may meet in private with its attorney to discuss pending litigation to which the entity is presently a party before a court or administrative agency, provided certain conditions are met, including the requirement that a transcript of the executive session be made part of the public record upon conclusion of the litigation. In this case, I am requesting the school board's advice concerning pending litigation that's styled as Teresa Javier perhaps, versus Orange County School Board in case number 2019-CA-0003008-0 on Tuesday, March 8th, 2022, immediately following the school board meeting. The executive session will be a closed meeting held in Conference Room E at the ELC and will take approximately 1 hour. A notice has been drafted for posting, and those in attendance will be Teresa Jacobs, Chair, Pam Gould, Vice Chair, Angie Gallo, School Board Member. Perhaps she might be out of town.
No, Pam Gould is not vice chair at this time.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Let's try this again, shall we? Thank you. I'm so used to reading it. Those in attendance will be Teresa Jacobs, Chair, Melissa Bird, Vice Chair, Angie Gallo, School Board Member, Johanna Lopez, School Board Member, Linda Covert, School Board Member, Vicki Lane Felder, School Board Member, Karen Castor Denner, School Board Member, and Pam Gould, School Board Member. And Dr. Maria Vasquez, Deputy Superintendent, Amy Enval, School Board's General Counsel, John Palmerini, Deputy General Counsel, and Michelle Morales, our outside counsel, and a court reporter. And that's all I have.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. To change my template wording. All right. So moving on, we're going back to our second set of B policies. I know we had 7 or so work sessions on our first set of B policies. We are starting reviewing your second set of B policies. And these are the policies that are in the heading they all start with the letter B. And we're going to talk about the NEPN classification system, but the section B is reserved for all the policies that start with section B are about school board governance and operations. And so we're going to start with our next batch. The first policy is school district operational goals, and it's policy BA. You will see here in the red line, it's the same kind of terminology changes that we're having in all of our other ones. There really are not any, and these are just ones that I've looked through. I just went through and made my technical formatting changes. This is really for the board to discuss. There really hasn't been much that has changed in this area. The statutes remain the same. So I don't really have any legal recommendations for this unless the board has some other things. Would you rather me go through each section so you understand what they all are? Is that more helpful?
Board, do we need to go through them?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
These are, so basically the first title is School Improvement and Educational Accountability. It talks about your school improvement plans and how the initial plan, what's included in the initial plan components, that it has to be developed based upon the recommendations of the School Advisory Council. And then the district process for the initial approval and subsequent annual approval of school improvement plans. The communication program is section C, and it goes all the way through and then it ends at section 2, which is the school board approval. I do not believe we've had any statutory changes or any procedural changes. This would just be taking a look at it because it was last adopted in 2008, and just making sure I've changed some of the statutory revisions down there as well, and just making sure its terminology is consistent.
Okay, no comments.
No comments on that one? Okay. The second policy that we're going to talk about is policy BDD. I'm going to scroll down a little bit, sorry. This one is, there we go, titled Board Superintendent Relations. Again, this sets forth the balance between the board and the superintendent. It goes back to that graphic that I showed you at the beginning of today's session, where we have the operational versus the setting the policies section. Again, I don't have a lot of changes in this particular one, not legal changes anyway, just some more technical changes. The biggest change would be down on section 5 that talks about the written evaluation for the superintendent. Just changed it a little bit to read: a written evaluation document will be compiled by the board chair or designee and shared with the superintendent in a noticed meeting, and then a summary shall be shared with the board at a public meeting. Not really sure how we got executive session in there, but there's no provision in the statutes to have an executive session to go over the superintendent's evaluation.
That was my one question. Thank you.
Yeah, not really sure how that got there.
Nor has it ever been practiced.
No, it hasn't. We've never done it either. So anyway, so there we go. This is a perfect example of why we need to look at our policies sometimes, because they have things in there that we're not really sure how they got in there. So do we have any questions about that one? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if it's not supposed to be in there, when are we going to discuss getting it out? Are we just going to?
So yeah, this is our work session. So we're going to talk about what the board wants. These are your board policies. So all the B policies are owned by you all. This isn't something that staff can bring to you with proposed revisions. These all belong to you, and they haven't been revised or taken a look at in a while. So that's why we're doing that. So I've made my suggested changes, and I'm waiting to hear from you all. But these are very this second set of B policies is very. It's pretty much standard. There's not tons of changes. And I think these can probably move through the process pretty quickly, so we can put those in our done in 2022 category. So.
Okay, so we obviously have to take the word executive out because that is not, there's nothing in the statute that allows for a closed-door meeting. The question is, the board has not been having a board discussion. It's been a matter of each board member doing completing a review. They come to me for compiling and producing a final report. So I think we do need to discuss whether that is something that should come to the board as a public discussion of performance. And Member Gould, you're recognized.
So I think what we've done in the past is acknowledged it, and then that document is available to the public if they wish to see it. I think unless there is disagreement among the board, like, one of us gives a 1 and one gives a 5 on a particular area, if there's kind of a consensus in that range and agreed upon, I don't know that there needs to be more of a discussion than that at the table about it. So does that cover under that language that if we acknowledge that it was done and it is available for the public, is that considered a discussion? I guess is my question.
All right. Well, let me ask Ms. Emval if you have an answer to that.
I don't have an answer to that. I would also have to look at your superintendent's contract. So
Yeah.
that may dictate. I believe there's a whole evaluation component in there. I don't know if it actually even contains the word August in it. So that might be a disconnect. And if you are selecting a new superintendent, this policy may change again. So perhaps it needs to be a little more vague, not vague, but a little more policies, as we've discussed, needs to be a little more broader to allow you to have that, because even though it says each August, I know we didn't do it last time because we had COVID and we didn't have evaluations for anyone. So I think that needs to be something that you can discuss. I'll take any suggestions and try to wordsmith a little bit for you.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Right this minute, I am trying to find the changes that you made. I'm not seeing in BoardDocs. Yeah, I don't have a big screen. So I was trying to pull it up so that I could go back and forth because it doesn't seem to be. How do you have it?
It's in BoardDocs. It's under the first policy. They're all together in one PDF.
That's what it is.
I didn't do them separately because it was going
to
take me too much time to switch back and forth because some of them are only half a page long.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm multitasking and it's not, I wasn't doing that good of a job at it, obviously. So let me go to.
Can you all see my screen on your screens? Okay.
Let me go to Vice Chair Byrd for comment.
I hear what you're saying, Member Gould. My concern is, what if we are in a situation where we have an issue, like you said, and we have got a great superintendent now, but let's just say we have a problem, and I'm just saying, in the future, I think maybe when we, and I can't remember now when we did the evaluation before, were the results, because it says a summary shall be shared with the board at a public meeting. Was a summary ever given? It seems like I only remember it being in the documents in like consent agenda, and we just approved it. But nobody ever says. Okay. So then I guess it could be just pulled off the consent agenda and discussed if there was a problem. Okay, sorry, I was just thinking it out loud. Okay, never mind, I'm good.
Member Colbert?
As opposed to each August, we could put annually no later than, you can pick a month, end of the calendar year, end of the school year. And then I believe what you've redlined here is in line with the practice that we have had. So yes, we each meet with the superintendent and go over our review. Chair will meet with the superintendent as well. And then what I recall, and Member Gould, correct me if I'm wrong, generally the chair would make a statement that the superintendent has received a review. Sometimes the summative score is announced at the table, and then the documents are on BoardDocs for the public to review, because I also recall having newspaper articles where the reporter would quote some of the comments that board members put in there. So that's how it has been shared at the board table and with the public.
All right. So I think we might want to slightly massage this language, but it sounds like by having it on the agenda, and maybe it isn't a consent agenda, I don't know that so much matters, that there should at least be an announcement at the meeting. I have a slightly different question. It's under 3B. It says the board will review superintendent performance as identical, will view superintendent performance as identical to organizational performance, so that organizational accomplishment of board stated goals and avoidance of board prescribed means will be viewed as successful superintendent performance. So the superintendent is successful if she avoids board prescribed means. I don't understand where an avoidance of board prescribed means has anything to do with this sentence. Except seemed like when this was, we've discussed this before, we went through the board policies, there seemed to be a lot of issues that were trying to be resolved by policy. And I think this was a carryover to maybe board members that were engaging inappropriately at individual school or operational levels. I don't know. But if you read the sentence, if you take out an avoidance of board prescribed means, it makes all the sense in the world. But her performance, his or her performance, is identical to organizational performance, so that the organizational accomplishment of board stated goals will be viewed as successful superintendent performance, and avoidance of board prescribed means. I don't know. I just don't know.
I don't have the history of why that was adopted in 2008. I tried to look back through our electronic files, and we don't have anything that I could find that would identify why certain language was used back in 2008.
Yeah, I think there's sufficient language in the policies about the role that the board should and shouldn't have, that I don't think that we have to include it in there, that the superintendent's not going to be successful in the board's eyes unless she avoids board prescribed means. I think that's kind of more of a board control issue, that if we're going to have language, we should put it in the section how we govern ourselves. So I'd just take out those.
So am I hearing that? I'm seeing some nods. Am I seeing a general agreement to cross out that portion?
Yeah.
And avoidance of board prescribed means. It does make more sense. It was a little oddly worded, I thought, too.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I just got confused when I was reading it. I had to read it about 4 or 5 times. So when I have to read something 4 or 5 times, generally
clarification.
It needs to be clarified.
That's why we're here.
As I started to clarify, I was like, okay, so basically if we butt out, then you're okay. But if we don't butt out and you can't ignore us, then you failed. So I think the problem on that one is us. So we'll make sure that we tackle that on our own responsibilities. I think that's it on that.
Yes, I think so. there's no changes, substantive changes to what I thought anyway. Board expectations for the superintendent, I thought they were pretty clear, and along with, it mentioned your strategic plan, just like we talked about when we did our other first set of B policies, if that makes sense. All right. Moving over to file, we call them files back then, I don't know where that came from, but policy BDF. So this is your Unitary Status Advisory and Oversight Committee. Wanted to give you all a little bit of background about why we have this policy and where it came from, because I think that's important. There was desegregation litigation that lasted almost 40 years, and as a result, a settlement agreement between the plaintiffs and the Orange County Public Schools was executed by the parties on October 12th of 2010. In settling the litigation, the settlement agreement was required OCPS to take certain actions with respect to three main issues. Number one was the diverse recruitment of OCPS personnel. Number two was the disclosure of extracurricular activities at the middle schools and high schools. And number three was the construction, renovation, replacement, and utilization of OCPS facilities, including portables. In an effort to ensure the public's confidence and trust in the compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement, the school board voluntarily adopted this policy, BDF, the Unitary Status Advisory and Oversight Committee, establishing that committee. And it outlined the committee's purpose, the composition, the procedural duties, and the responsibilities. Also, as a result of the settlement agreement, OCPS policy JJ, extracurricular activities, was amended, and OCPS policy GCE, recruitment and retention of a diverse employment staff, was implemented to include information supporting the settlement agreement's objectives. In 2013, at the suggestion of then school board member Kat Gordon, the composition of the advisory committee was increased from 8 to 16 members. Now it consists of one voting member and one alternate member appointed by each of the elected members of the school board. In addition, the policy was modified to allow for the terms of service to be staggered to reduce the amount of committee member turnover from year to year. And participation and engagement on the committee was increased, and a quorum was met on each and every occasion. The last thing that I can find in our records was a report from 2017 to 18 for the fiscal year for the advisory committee, and they had 5 meetings on those dates, and there was a report that was provided. It divided it up into the human resources component, the facilities component, and the extracurricular activities component. On our website, I know that we have had once COVID hit in 2019, when we were getting ready to have some meetings, we got a number, of course, with everything with the pandemic, we got a number of inquiries that were not comfortable coming in. So the advisory committee has not met. The changes that are in policy BDF are actually very, very limited. I do not think that there is any recommendation to discontinue this advisory committee. In fact, I think we need to reconstitute it, and we're looking at doing that in the near future, because I believe the composition, some of the people may not want to serve, and I believe we may have one that's no longer with us as well. So I welcome any questions about this particular policy.
I agree with you. I think we need to continue the advisory role of the Oversight Committee. I think I was concerned about the fact that since I've been here, I haven't had a request to reappoint anybody, and so I wanted to make sure that we had the board still, that it was fully manned. So it is at this point. As
We do, yeah. We still have, if you look under it's actually under the board tab, school board tab on the website, there's a drop-down box for Unitary Status Advisory and Oversight Committee, and it's all there. It shows you all the membership and everything. You have a very robust membership. Some of them are also on your reapportionment committee. So I would have to reach out to each of them to see if they're still interested in serving. And if they are not, then, but we can reconstitute that in the near future so we can start to have those meetings again. As you recall, there is legislation that says that we can have advisory committee meetings. We just can't take any action. So for those that may not be comfortable coming in person, we could still, maybe use some technology means for those. But I just wanted to let you know where we were on that.
Okay. And what is the maximum term they can serve?
I'd have to read it again. I don't remember. I'd have to read what the resolution was establishing their terms.
Yeah, I'm going to try to look at that when I call a member Colbert right now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Council Enval, if you could just clarify for me in section 1, and I think I know why, but if you can just clarify, where it says, except for the initial term for members of the USAOC nominated by school board member representing districts 1, 2, and 3, as well as school board chair, all other nominees, including alternates, shall be appointed to serve a term of no less than 2 calendar years. It's just a little, can you just clarify that for me?
What I think happened is I think once you establish the committee and set it up, everybody had the same terms because they all started on the same day. So I think that was designed to be a staggered term, so you don't have everybody going off at the same time. So you have some continuity.
That's what I thought. So do we still need that in there?
Probably not, but I don't know if you want to. I mean, I can maybe catch when it was originally established. I can probably write some language into there that the original establishment of this committee was, just to kind of capture it, because that's not how it is anymore.
I think that would be good to clarify. Thank you.
Remember?
So, so I am concerned because it says that they can be maybe reappointed for additional 2 terms. And it sounds like, although I don't know that it was clear in here, that a term is 4 years. So they can be appointed for 8 years. And then, according the way this sounds, it certainly leads me to believe they can't be appointed after 4 years or after 8 years. And we may want that to be the case. We may want to have a provision that if they are willing to serve and if the district board member nominates them for reappointment, maybe it takes a supermajority or something, but we may want to allow them to serve for more than 8 years. I don't know why it would necessarily be beneficial to us to have mandatory term limits on these advisory members because, frankly, their knowledge and the continuity on there is, I think, a strength for us. So that's one thing I would like for us to change in this.
I'll definitely look at that, and I'll see if I can find some more historical documentation. See if I can find some history. I know we have binders and binders in our office.
Yeah.
I just didn't have a chance to look through them all.
Yeah, and maybe since I've been here, we've reappointed some of them. We must have, but I just don't remember seeing it. So, all right, is anybody uncomfortable with us not having a mandatory 8 years and you're out, a term limit on?
No, that's what
No. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't. Member Gould.
I am in agreement with that for the reasons that you stated, Chair, because, particularly with this committee, I think we need the people, a mix, but we need some people with that historical knowledge that may have even been part of creating this, because this was a huge pivot point in setting up OCPS for success. So that is really essential to make sure we don't lose that background in knowledge.
I agree with you, and I also think that the watchdog role is extremely important. So, all right, so if there's not objection, we'll see a version back that doesn't have this limit on 2.
Yes, and then I'm also going to look, we need to make a revision to Section 10. It says the USAOC shall be terminated
yes.
upon a vote of the board or upon expiration of the settlement agreement, whichever condition occurs first. The settlement agreement has been expired, so I need to work on that language if your intent is to keep that moving.
Yeah, so it could just say may be terminated upon a vote of the board? Because the expiration
So I think
of
the intent
settlement-
is that you want to keep it going, so that
We
that
do.
review continues to ensure that we comply with those terms of the settlement agreement, even if it's expired already.
Yeah, but we have to get rid of the language that's there.
Yes.
Either we get rid of the termination altogether,
Yes,
or we change it to say,
right. I'll make a note to put a red line. Sorry, I didn't catch that the first time.
okay.
Madam
All right.
Chair.
Dr. Jenkins?
So I was going to add, I like that you just took the step to eliminate that language. Just as a reminder, when Dr. Gordon, when she was on the board, was so adamant about it. All the research around unitary status and vestiges of segregation, there was clear national research that said districts reach unitary status, and then there's no oversight, and then they slide back, and the data then starts to reflect that there's some segregational practices coming back into play, whether intentional or not. And so the intent was oversight, voluntary oversight by the board was intentionally to make sure that there are not any slippages back in those particular areas back toward the days of segregation. And so that critical rationale behind it would also, I wanted the board to come to that conclusion initially, and then just remind you that was part of the rationale was at a national level there is slippage in districts sometimes after they're declared unitary. So
Well,
appreciate your careful attention to that.
And on the heels of that, of your explanation, it'd be nice if the language reflected that, some of that very language, that I think the intent, so that a future board reading that will see that this board made a decision that they felt it was imperative that we continue to have this oversight to prevent what we've seen in other school districts. So I'll leave it to you to come up with your great team of wordsmithing over there, and you're probably doing it right now. I hear the superintendent typing it up as we speak. No, it's okay. It's good. Okay, thank you.
We'll work on that. Okay.
I think
we have,
superintendent might have it just about done now.
yeah,
Thank you very
we
much.
have some good direction there. Okay, so moving on to, we don't have many left. I think we'll meet our deadline today,
Good
so we'll
deal.
see. Moving to policy BDG, which is called School Attorney Legal Services. This one pretty much has, it's pretty much stayed the same since we enacted it in 2016. Your first section is initiation of lawsuits or appeals. Then we have some counterclaims and third-party claims and attorney's fees and costs. In subsection 3, I actually added TPAs because a lot of times people don't know what a TPA is, so I think it's important. I said that out, third-party administrator. Do you want me to go through these individually, or are you familiar enough with the policy? Third-party administrator. And I think it talks about the litigation and the authority, and then let's see, the authorization to approve other legal expenditures is there. Those are ancillary costs of litigation and court reporters, arbitration, all those things. Those are already what I approve. Have any questions about that particular section? Nope. Okay. Moving on to the next section, litigation settlement authority. Again, not proposing any changes. We had a little bit of a hiccup once. We putting designee there for the senior director of risk management. There was a time she was not available, and so we want to make sure there's a designee there just in case, because a lot of times, a lot of these litigation settlement authority, when we're looking at that needs to be made relatively quickly if we have deadlines coming up. So I think that's only one. The amounts still remain the same. Anything over 50 has to come to the school board for approval. Yes, ma'am.
Member Gould.
So I'm noticing a lot of inflation everywhere. And I don't know that it's just around this policy, but I'm wondering if we as a board should be looking at some of those limits, because 50,000 today is not what it was yesterday in signing authority, even though it sounds like a lot of money. I'm just seeing costs go up between 20 and 30% across the board, and maybe we need things to settle a little bit, but I would want to put it out there that might be something we want to look at, and then wherever those maximums are, if the board decided to adjust it in the future. I'm not sure where that falls because that covers a lot of different policies, but I do think it's something we're going to need to look at, or we're going to end up meeting on a lot of things that are very in rote and not extraordinary.
I will tell you that, John, we just had our Florida School Board Attorneys Association conference, and the limits are pretty much the same throughout the state. That's what pretty much they are now. But I agree that there's more litigation, if I can opine, and I think with our with some of the legislative changes that are coming, it might be something you have to evaluate. Absolutely.
And what's the proposal in front of the legislature right now regarding statutory sovereign immunity?
I think it's been changed. It was tiered, right? So it was $1,400,000? I forget.
So it's a tiered system where it was initially going to be $1 million, and then it went down to like 500 per person to $1 million, and then it went down to a tiered system where it said, depending on how big your county, your city is, your municipality is, the limits would be different. So if you happen to get in an accident on one side of the street and it was in the county, and the county had 250,000 residents, you would be entitled to more money than if you got in the accident on the city side of the street. If your city had less than 50,000, it's still being worked through. They're looking to bump it up a little bit. The current limits are 200 per person and 300,000 per occurrence. We've heard numbers like 300 and 500, 300 per person, 500 per occurrence, but they're still working that through in the legislature.
Okay, so maybe after that issue is settled, we can come back and look at that in that relationship. It makes sense.
Percentage.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's even a percentage of whatever the sovereign immunity is, because this is about 10% to 20% of the current sovereign immunity. Maybe there's, rather than a dollar figure that may, because hopefully inflation will come down too.
I would want to definitely, though, look at what our peers are doing, because
Yeah.
I do think that while that might make sense, I also understand the optics of us saying, okay, well, we're just going to up it and nobody else does. And so why is it that we're willing to spend more money without board oversight? So I think we've got to be cautious. But you're at the right table all the time having these conversations. You can take Member Gould's input into consideration.
Absolutely.
And it is worthwhile looking at. Absolutely. Don't disagree. Okay, next policy.
We're getting there. Okay. And you know I like policies, so the last two are my favorites. So it is going to be recommended. We have two board policies. We have BG, which is called Board Policy, School Board Policy Process, and then we have BGC, which is called Review of Policies. BGC is one paragraph long. So as we're condensing some of these policies, but we're going to talk about those in just a minute, I think that's kind of what we look like when we're looking at them. I mean, even like we just talked about with your instructional materials policy, you have 4 policies. Does it make sense to put them all into one, or maybe put them into 2, depending, because you just certainly don't then want a policy that's 40 pages long either. So anyway, so let's move on to BG. It is going to be recommended that policy BGC, review of policies, be repealed in its entirety and incorporated into policy BG, and you'll see that I have done that here. So recommending the normal standard change to the School Board of Orange County, Florida. Added some titles here. So just like in the other policies, added a traditional rules portion there. This goes back to what I did at the very beginning of this, that the term rule is defined in section 120.52, and those are your policies. Just like a county or municipality has ordinances, the school board has policies. Moving on to subsection 1A, we have the superintendent or designee shall give immediate and proper written notice to the public when the school board has determined they'll give due consideration to the proposal for adoption. Did designee because that's something that our office has been working on. So the Office of Legal Services has been the cruise director, if you will, for the facility revision process. So just technical change there, spelling out the word 21, and then the language here is there's just been some red lines added. I'm sorry, to the bottom red line part. It's hard for me to read. But that's consistent with what the statute says. I added a provision that if anybody who's looking for a full text of the proposed rule and a summary, they get a copy of that without cost. That's in the statute. It's with the implementation of electronics and technology, we have the red lines available on our website, and it's very easy to find those. When you go on our policy page, there is a policy revisions tab on the left-hand side, and those have all the policies that are currently, the red lines that are currently up for review. These are not there yet because they haven't been scheduled for a work session, so they're just in draft format. Section B, of course, has some more spelling out the word 21 and capitalizing the word board. Moving down to section D. So they talk about policy handbooks. And so a little bit of history. Up in, Deborah McGill has custody of our original board policies that were actually in a bound book, and they're very large. And she uses gloves to turn them because the paper is very thin, but it's kind of neat to kind of see that. And we also have, if some of you may have been around long enough to know, we have the orange books. And they were just binder, like 4-inch, 6-inch binders of policies. And so every time one was amended, poor Miss McGill would sit there and take out the old one and put the new one in. So all of our policies, you'll notice, are totally indented on the left-hand side. And the reason for that is so that we could punch holes in them and put them in the policy binders. At one point, all the schools had their own policy binders, and they were responsible for updating them all the time. And that has become, not only is it not very environmentally conscious, it has become, with the implement of the internet and our website, everything is available there. So trying to incorporate some of those changes here, but remember, we're still confined by the specific language of Chapter 120. So some of the language that's in here has some of that in there. So added to Section D, that will post it also to the district website. Section 2, we added a provision, the first, as you recall, the first section is called traditional rules because that's the normally way we adopt our policy. I put a heading for emergency rules because I think it's important for the public to know there's two different ways that we can do them. We really hadn't used the emergency rules provision as far as I can even track back at OCPS. I'm sure they did it sometime, but we did have to do it recently, as you recall. And so again, added to subsection the new 2B, the superintendent or designee shall properly record the effective date for any such emergency rule. Remember, they're good for 90 days. And then we start the normal process, policy process, if we want to make sure we extend those emergency rules. So section 3 is a new section that I proposed because I think it's going to be a little bit easier. In some other districts, we're going to talk about, in just a minute, we're going to talk about Neola and where that comes from and some other, it's a little bit farther along the way. We actually follow the NEPN classification system that was established by the National School Board Association. A lot of other districts do not do that, but one of our things that is consistent with a lot of the districts across the state is they have a technical changes in their policy process. And this one, I'm just going to read it so you can kind of understand. Periodically, it may be deemed necessary to make technical corrections to policies that have already been adopted through the normal statutory procedures. These technical corrections may include consolidation of sections, transfer of sections, combining or dividing sections, renumbering sections, chapters, and titles, corrections or additions for grammatical or typographical errors, and or alterations and omissions not affecting the constructions or meanings of those sections, subsections, chapters, titles, or policies as a whole. So for instance, in a couple of our policies, I've noticed that we have improper statutory citation. And sometimes it was, maybe it's an older policy that was, all of our policies were back in the 200s, but they've all been moved to the 1000s. Or maybe we incorrectly did a subsection citation that maybe was correct at the time the policy was adopted, but the subsection has since changed with further litigation or legislation. So moving on to subsection B, my proposal, and you can please feel free to not take it if you don't want it. Should it be determined by the board, the superintendent or designee, I have to change that a little bit, sorry, to make such technical corrections, it may be accomplished by resolution as part of the consent agenda without going through the normal policy adoption procedure. So this would be an example of, we have the wrong statutory citation in policy ABC, right? So it would be a red line on the consent agenda that says, hey, we're changing the statutory citation because it's incorrect, put it on the consent agenda for you to do. So those technical changes, like some of your B policies actually don't even have statutory citations in them right now, and it would be like adding those. It's not going to change the text of it or what you approved, but it would be a method by which the board could adopt those technical changes. Right now, I can't go in and make any of these formatting changes or whatever. I would like them all to be justified back over so they're not super long, because when you click on them and you have to scroll through, we have some policies, I know you've seen them, where the text is on the right-hand side and you have to scroll all the way down to go through. It doesn't make sense to have somebody do that, so that would be my recommendations.
I think you oversold it.
It would make my life a lot easier.
No, it would make all of our lives easier. And speaking of which, and it may have been caught, and one of the citations that we went over today in one of the rules was
is wrong.
Did you find it? It
I
was
did.
something,
Yep.
something, .16?
Yep.
Should have been 15?
Yep.
It's fixed?
No, it will be.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me know afterwards, because I
Yeah.
can't find it right now. And as soon
Yeah.
as you said that, I flashed back to wanting to point that. Okay, good.
So that
Yeah,
would be the
that's a
plan.
great example. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
because it makes sense. And so justifying them all back over. But so remember we talked about at the beginning of adding our policies into BoardDocs potentially. Right now, as it is, I can't go in and move and change them and renumber them and reletter them. We have so many different titles in some of those. In my mind, they should be Roman numeral 1, like we have a standard template for them. Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, and then A, B, C underneath, and 1, 2, 3 under this, and little A, B, C under that. So that's all the same. But for staff to go, it would be my staff, unfortunately, to go back through and renumber and reformat things. They would have to do that before they would upload it into BoardDocs, and then BoardDocs would be searchable. We do have an interim measure that we would like to do is we have a mock-up of what the website could look like now. That would have, right now, for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Because we have to follow the NEPN classification system, our board policy ADD is called Safe Schools, but that's our bullying and harassment policy. Well, because we follow that lettering and naming system, nobody's going to know that our bullying and harassment policy is in policy ADD. So I have a temporary website fix and then a permanent one once we get, but this is a monumental task to be able to make those formatting changes and stuff like that. But those would we would start with our new policies as we go through, fix the formatting and then fix them all, but go through that technical changes provision in this particular policy, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yep, okay. Change the next section 4, to rule proposals. And we have had these actually. This is actually a provision in the statute. Anyone can get information relating to the method proposing a rule or can submit a rule proposal to the superintendent. So we have those, we consider those. Copies of rules. This is one that's a little bit outdated a little bit. A copy of the compiled rules as updated shall be available for inspection in the office of the superintendent or designee, because I actually have them, which as my staff, as each policy is adopted, we pull out, and we actually have a hard copy as well. And we also put it on the district website, which I've added to as well. So any questions about that?
Member Coburn.
First, may I just say that I love that you have favorite policies.
I do.
Throw that out there. And this is just, please answer the why behind the what. So if the rules are our policies, and this is under school board policy process, then why are we calling them rules instead of policy?
So the statute calls them rules, and the statute calls them rules for everybody. So the ordinances are technically rules by statute under Chapter 120, 5.2 and 5.4. So it just depends on what, like a county calls them ordinances, we call them policies. Someone else might call them something else. But ours have always been policies. We could change them all to rules, but that makes it a little bit, I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It clarifies. So it's in line with statute for this portion. That's fine, but that helps. Thank you.
Is that because when I came here, I was struggling with that because I knew you went through rulemaking. I remember asking Woody, okay, we're going through all this rulemaking, but you're adopting a bunch of policies. When are we going to get to the rules? So is that clear anywhere in here for the public? Okay.
So under section 1001.41, which is the general powers of district school board, it says under section 1 that you have to determine policies and programs consistent with state law and rule deemed necessary by it for the efficient operation and general improvement of the district school system. And 2 says you have to adopt rules pursuant to chapter 120.536 and 120.54 to implement the provisions of law conferring duties upon it to supplement those prescribed by the State Board of Education and the Commissioner of Education.
Hence, the confusion starts there.
It sure does. It sure does. That's why I was like, I don't understand why you call them policies. Well, we do because, and a lot of times it gets confused with procedures because a lot of places have policies that establish their conduct, but our policies are actually your rules and your procedures are under your rules. Yeah, thank you. It's my phone a friend. I know all the statutes by heart person. All right, so moving on, the next section of the policy is schedule for legal advertisement. That hasn't changed. That's still in accordance with the statute 120.54. I put at least 21 days because the way the calendar works, sometimes we can't, if we have to put an advertisement on Wednesday to advertise on Sunday, we have to make sure it's at least 21 days.
Have a comment or question from Vice Chair.
I was just going to say, could we maybe in this policy just put a sentence explaining rules and policies?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that would be helpful for the public.
Absolutely.
Also, as far as that big job of transferring policies, is that maybe something that, and I don't know, you could totally say no, absolutely not, but is this something we could maybe bring students in on, I don't know, like a internship or something, or community service hours, or?
I'd have to consider that because I'd want to make sure that everything was
Is done
transferred word for word.
Right, right.
So we have legal interns too, so maybe that would be a good legal intern.
Right.
That was a really good thought, though. But yes, no, I think adding a definition of rule and why we call them policies, I think that would be very good clarification. We're almost done, I promise. Okay, so policy maintenance, which it's already been said in the policy, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it here because it was here already. It basically says the superintendent or designee shall establish procedures for the maintenance of rules adopted by the board. These procedures shall address the manner by which the new policies will be developed, classified, adopted, and disseminated. This portion is, this is where we have, that most people don't understand that we have it and why we have it. The procedures shall be administered in accordance with the National Education Policy Network, the National School Boards Association, NEPN, NSBA policy classification system. So that is, I didn't print up a copy of it for you because I didn't want to waste that many trees, but it is a document, I think it's 30-some pages. I posted it on BoardDocs, so it's available for the public. But this is a classification system that we have to follow, and that's why we have to follow them. Section A policies are all about foundations and basic commitments. Section B is all about school board governance and operations. Section C is all about general school administration. Section D is about fiscal management. Section E is about support services. F is about facilities. That one's easy because it starts with the same letter. G is about personnel. H is about, negotiations. I is about instruction. That kind of made sense too. J is all about your students. All your student policies are under J. And then K is about public community. School community and home relations is K. And then there's one L about education and agency relations. So that's what we've been following, and that's why you have, it starts with an A, and then it goes to AA, and then it goes AB, and AC, and ACA, and there's a whole litany of what the policies are supposed to happen. I think way back when this was last adopted, the NEPN classification system was last adopted in 2012. It was last revised in 2012. I think originally it was established by the National School Board Association as a nationwide methods by which school boards could classify their policies. So if you moved from Maryland to Florida, you know that policy JJ that extracurricular activities, was your policy JJ in Maryland was the same, well, not the same, but you knew where to find it anyway when you moved to Florida. That was about extracurricular activities. I can tell you over the course of the years, I do not know another school district in the state of Florida that is still using the NEPN classification system. I did check Neola's website. Neola is a new, it's a policy company, if you will. 31 of the 67 Florida school districts have switched to Neola. What they do is they actually give you sample template language that you borrow from, and it's a numbering system. You can look for examples of that. It's Brevard, Alachua, Polk. A lot of them use that. I'm not saying one way or another if I think we need to go to that, but I just want to let you know there's other systems. And then I believe Seminole does not use Neola, but they have another numbering system as opposed to the lettering system. When I checked across nationwide to see if other districts are still using the NEPN NSBA classification system, I can find some districts, but there's not like a national trend where everybody's going to one system like I think there was in the past. I think they're going to whatever works the best for them right now. So that's how we landed with our lettering system.
Okay, so two things. One, I guess you're looking for input from the board as to whether or not to stay with this. That's one. Why don't we just stop there, and then I want to come back to this overall.
And recognizing
paragraph.
if we switch, it is a monumental task. So I don't know. It's going to be very.
Well, then I'm not sure. I mean, we'll take input, but I think, frankly, I want to understand the amount of time and effort that goes into that before asking you to do it. So that would be a critical decision, point of the decision making.
I mean, part of my personal recommendation, not necessarily legal, but having dealt with the policy since 2013, this system, it makes sense. We have it, but I think we need to get all of them revised to where they need to be. But if we were to switch to, let's say we were going to switch to Neola, all of our language that we did would go away, because Neola, what they do is they essentially copyright, or they give you standard template language, and you kind of massage it a little bit to your purposes, but you pretty much have to stick to what their template language says. So it doesn't allow you as much leeway, because then they don't guarantee. They supposedly are, I'd have to let them give you a sales pitch or whatever, but the reasoning behind it is similar to what the NSBA classification system was to begin with, is so that districts are consistent, across. So that board policy 2240 in one county is the same, you'll find the same information in 2240 in another county. So I guess it's just a policy classification system by another name.
Okay, so let's hear, thank you for that. That was helpful. And I do have concerns about the paragraph on the top paragraph on page 15, but we'll come back to that. Member Colbert.
Thank you. Yes, I did want to hear your personal recommendation on this. And did I hear you say that it would need to change in order to put it on BoardDocs? It would need to go to a numbered system? Did I hear you say?
No. I just, before I had, so in order to copy everything onto BoardDocs doesn't allow you to copy the formatting exactly. And right now our policies have these strange boxes. And so anyway, long story, it's a technical thing, but in order for my staff would have to copy the policy completely, paste it into BoardDocs, and then reformat it. And I don't want them to do that and have to reformat it the way that our policies are now if we're going to change that formatting so we don't have 6 titles in a policy rather than Roman numerals. I'd rather be able to have the flexibility to fix the formatting and then upload them, so we only have to do it once to BoardDocs. I haven't checked with BoardDocs that we can still use the policies tab, but I can tell you that my staff has access to the policies tab, and they have started to put some in, and that's when we realized that there were some configuration issues, and I don't want them to spend all that time putting them all in there until we can have them the way they need to be.
Okay. So, and that's a management thing for you all to look at as far as your time and the workload. But I don't see any necessity to go to Neola. I think we develop our policies based on what we need here in Orange County. So in my opinion, we don't need to change that.
Thank you, Member Colbert. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Linda. I do have a question. I don't like our numbering system and our policies. I do find it to be confusing, and it's hard for parents and our community members to navigate through it. So I would be interested in getting more information on how we can streamline it and make it more efficient. But I don't know that we have to use someone else's system to create more work by formatting and changing our policy. Like, would there be a way to keep the language and the format currently, matching them all up, and then kind of use our own system, or find an easy way to group our policies that would make sense for everyone?
You want to respond to that, Ms.?
I think we could certainly do that. I do think that the lettering system is sometimes confusing, or a lot of confusing. I do think we could probably come up with our own system, like if we were going to do, numbers like number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever, and 3.01 or 3.02 or whatever, and just keep the titles of what they are. The other thing that historically we have done with our policies is we have not strayed from the titles that are used in the NEPN classification system. And so that's a perfect example as to why our Safe Schools policy is called Safe Schools instead of bullying and harassment. So if we were to adopt or go with a modified, keep the same system that we have, but maybe renumber it, then we could also retitle some of those to actually reflect, so the policy contacts are actually reflected in the title.
Member Gallo, did that address your question?
Yes, Madam
All right,
Chair,
thank you.
yes, thank you.
All right, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with Member Colbert that I don't think that we have no need for Neola, just because they would basically be doing what our own legal department does. They work with you to create the policies, and I think there's probably some districts that help is beneficial, but I don't think we need that. I am in favor of putting the policies on BoardDocs so that it's searchable. I think that would be a lot easier for our families. And then I also think it's a great idea to be able to regroup them where it makes sense, either with new lettering or numbering, and also changing the titles for sure. It just needs to be something where it makes more sense and where it's more intuitive and just easy for people to find what they're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Got some feedback. So let me share. I think we're almost done, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one concern that I have with the paragraph at this top of page, I think it's 15, it reads, the superintendent or designee shall establish procedures for the maintenance of rules adopted by the board. So when I saw maintenance, I thought that meant making sure that they're posted, they're available. But then when the next sentence, the procedures shall address the manner by which new policies will be developed, classified, adopted, and disseminated. So when I saw that, that suggests that to me that the superintendent or designee is going to establish procedures by which the board can adopt policies, can develop policies. And I don't have any discomfort with where we are right now with our superintendent and with you, but it seems to suggest that the superintendent has the ability to decide procedures by which the board can develop policies. And I think the board should be able to develop policies without being constrained by procedures established by the executive branch.
So perhaps it's that second sentence that is causing some concern.
Yes, because when I see maintenance of rules, I think the board establishes rules, the superintendent executes those rules, and maintaining them sounded like executing, but I'm not sure what maintenance means when I read the second sentence, and the second sentence would suggest to somebody that if the board wanted to go forward with a policy, there might be a procedure in place that interfered with the board's ability to initiate policies. The board should always be able to initiate policies.
Yes.
The board, I think, should adopt procedures for initiating policies, but I think the board should not let go of the
ability to do so. I don't think
initiate
anybody's
policy.
ever read that deeply into that sentence before, so.
I recognize that I read things very literally. But I think we need to rework this so that it's clear that the board can initiate policies.
You can, and actually, it's interesting because I took a look at the superintendent's job description and mine, and both require us to bring policy revisions to you for the board, which is interesting. And then you can do it on your own as well.
Right.
And I believe
and
we
I
have,
no problem with the superintendent and you being able to bring us policy revisions.
but you can do it on your own as well.
Exactly. I would have a
Exactly.
problem if the board could not could not initiate or revise a policy
Absolutely.
without you starting it. That would be problematic.
So just to
Yes.
make sure you all have your entertainment for the day,
Please.
1149, the general powers
Oh,
of the
no.
superintendent, it talks about, it says in subsection 2 that the superintendent shall recommend policies. And then in subsection 4, it says the superintendent shall recommend and execute rules. So in two separate subsections, he or she is recommending policies and recommending rules. So when you see the confusion as
Yes.
to why that is, the statutes actually call them two different things.
So do you have an implant in your brain, by the way? I've read some of these futuristic sci-fi books, and I'm wondering if you have implanted the entire online sunshine in your brain. Yeah, all the statutes there, the rules. Do you have those too?
He
Do you
has
have
an
the
app
rules?
for that.
Huh?
Yeah,
There's an
I-
app
Here's
for
that.
that?
No, it's
Called The
unfortunate that
Beautiful
when you were
Mind.
talking about the superintendent's authority, I'm like 1149 and it just pops. It's just what I
Okay,
did.
but the good news about all that is,
Beautiful mind.
though it may be confusing, there's nothing in the statute that says that the
No.
board cannot
No.
or can only react to things that are brought. So let's just, I'm not going to try to wordsmith this here, but is it, everybody's good?
We'll work on it.
Okay, we're all good. All right, work on that. Thank you.
Okay, so we have two more sections. Policy exemptions for changes in law. That basically says that if a law is
Oops,
enacted
I
that
am
changes.
so sorry. Member Felder.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to, I know that we're, John does have that kind of thing going on in his mind, figuring out stuff. But I just want to make sure that the policies that we make as a board, and then the superintendent, for an example, I want to make sure I'm clear. We talked about the mask mandate and how that needed to go. But as a superintendent, we gave her that ability to go ahead on and put in her policy that this is be 30 days with the mask, right? So that's a rule. So that, as a superintendent, she has that ability and that power to enforce that rule with members of the district. But as a board, we always will remain to have the right to institute policy. We're hoping that we're going to coincide with what is feasible for the district. Like, we're not going to institute a policy that's out the back door and nobody's doing it. You know, everybody come to work naked. No, we're not going to do that kind of policy. However, I think that anytime you're doing policy and wording, it takes a lot. It's a lot. It's very much involved because words are what we live by as a society, and they have various meanings. So, in what Board Member Byrd was saying about the simplicity of it for people that are coming on the website, parents and community people, I'm not in favor of you trying to redo the thing, but if there's some type of clarity in terms of, I don't know, content page or something, BDG means this or what, I can follow that. Because it is, I mean, I know you have to do all these alphabets or what have you to make sure, you keep things in place. But this may be a section in our policy that we may need to deal with in terms of the wording. You can't hurry through this,
Right.
even though we all have other lives. But the thing of the matter is, once we put a policy in place, this is what we have to go by. So I'm hoping that the consideration is being taken by board members that we have to have clarity at the policy that we're supposed to be instituting, what does that really mean? And that everybody stays in their lane. You know what I'm saying? We stay in our lane. So that's my only concern about the wording, that we're clear.
Okay, everybody stays in their lane?
Yes.
And then when we get to the end of our lane, superintendent makes a U-turn on us?
And then we make it.
And then she gets to the end of her lane and we make a U-turn.
And it goes back to, you know, I mean, we can look at a policy till we're blue in the face, which we have done, and we make language changes that we think make it are clear, and then you look at it again, you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't that clear, you know. So I mean, that's part of the board's wordsmithing and the way things go, and that's why we have to then go back through the whole process again and do it. And it's not, we are actually confined, the board is confined, unless it's an emergency policy, you're confined by following chapter 120.54, and that puts you at minimum, you know, 5 weeks out to making a policy change. And it's hard. It kind of hamstrings you a little bit, which is why you've delegated your authority sometimes to the superintendent for different things. So, good observation. Okay. So policy exemptions, changes in law basically says if there's a policy, if there's a rule change, then our policy changes with that law, and then we bring those forward to you. That's why you usually see more proposed policy revisions after legislative session, because those things have changed. And then the last policy, the last section, it was policy BGC, review of policies, but I've copied it and pasted it into the end of BG. It basically says staff review of rules. The superintendent shall establish and maintain an orderly plan for preserving and making accessible the rules adopted by the board and the administrative rules. A lot of it seems kind of redundant to what we've already talked about, but then this goes back into having all administrative, instructional, and non-instructional employees to become familiar with the board rules and other policies, regulations, memoranda, bulletins. We have our management directives, those kind of things. And then it goes back into it kind of crosses over a little bit into a G policy for personnel that it talks about the willful violation of board rules, subject to dismissal or lesser penalties, and then giving the superintendent the authority to look at those individually. So, and then I think that brings me to the end.
All right. Member Felder?
Yeah, okay. You just read through the BGC, right? This is page 16.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you're scratched through it. So you're going to put this in another section?
Yes. So if you look on the bottom of page 15, I've already
Okay, let
copied
me
it
go
into
back
the
to
bottom of page
15.
15. Hang on.
Okay, I see
sorry.
it. I got it right here, 15.
Yep. Sorry, I didn't move my. So basically, if you look, this was BGC. Mm-hmm. So I struck through it all and moved the whole thing up to
15.
right here.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I understood. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I think I have a lot of direction. So.
All right. Anything else from the board before we adjourn? All right. Meeting is now adjourned.
Oh, okay.